Welcome to the Get Better in Chelmsford podcast. I'm Rich, and today I'm sitting down with Lucy Folley from Tees Law, a firm with over a century of history and some genuinely important advice for every business owner in Essex. Don't wait until something goes wrong to listen to this one. Lucy, welcome this morning. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Before we dive into any detail, perhaps tell me a little bit about Tees. If someone hadn't heard of them, how would you describe the business?
Well, I guess Tees started off as a family-owned business years ago in about 1913. A chap called Stanley T, who was a lawyer, set up a practice in a local farmers market, essentially, and he gave advice to landowners and farmers. And rolling on, well over 100 years since then, we're now a regional practice with 5 offices, one of which is in Chelmsford, and with about 400 staff. 30 partners, 170 lawyers, and we still have a big agricultural practice, it's fair to say, but we've broadened our horizons over those years, and we've got a big private client practice and a big commercial practice acting for individuals and businesses, and a lot of them in the county.
Wowzers, it's quite sizable, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. But I mean, the way we look at it is we're big enough to have a depth of expertise now that we can sort of service, all individuals' needs, all business needs. But we're still small enough to be personal, and we pride ourselves on that, building relationships with our clients and helping them over the many years that they're in business, and that can be good times and bad times. Yeah,
and what would you say makes Tees different to perhaps some of the larger, if there are larger firms locally, and some of the smaller ones? How do you differentiate in this market?
I mean, I guess we've got a couple of things. We're fortunate enough to have a wealth practice within our business, which is really fantastic. They're completely independent. So, when a client comes to us, we can look after their legal needs, but also their financial needs. And that can be really interesting, personal investments, services that we can offer to companies. So setting up their pensions, employee benefits, all that good stuff. And I'd say the second thing is probably we really pride ourselves on exceptional client service. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be transactional. What we want to do is get involved with clients who are, from my perspective, because I'm a business lawyer, get involved with their business, learn about what they're doing. That enables us to give much more tailored advice. And so, acting as a trusted advisor rather than just a transactional lawyer who you phone up and say, well, I'm doing this now, can you help? Yeah. We want to be involved in the business as it grows, as it develops, as it acquires other businesses, and ultimately when it sells.
Yeah, and let's dig into that trusted piece a little bit if we can, because obviously I think there's an inherent perhaps appreciation for the law firms are just trusted. That's great. But what in practice does it look like to earn someone's trust in these kind of markets? What kind of behaviours or actions do you take to build that relationship?
I think obviously, expertise, it's a given. You don't go to a lawyer and expect to have bad advice. But I think it's actually spending time with clients that's not on the clock. It's going to their offices. Our clients who've got great businesses, they love talking about their businesses. So, if you go and visit them, spend a bit of time in the business, meet the key people, understand what they're doing, walk around the office, get introduced to people. It's amazing, what that delivers. And I think clients really appreciate that because you're taking time to understand what their aims are, what their objectives are. Obviously there's always the legalese that sits behind it, but if you deliver legal services knowing what your clients are looking to achieve ultimately, it actually, that can be more valuable.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where we'll dig into it a bit later, but I guess where you have the wealth side of it as well, which you're looking after the personal interests as well as the business, which I always struggle to understand how they're different anyway. Like they feel like one and the same goal, right?
And I think in small businesses it can feel like that, but I think, there are parameters, and I think, if you've got a small business owner, obviously they're going to draw money out of the business in the most tax efficient way, but what are you going to do with that? How are you going to invest that money? Normal things, pensions, ISAs, but there are some clever things to think about. There's something called a family investment company that people can set up and use that to make investments. And if you set it up correctly, it can have IHT benefits for, family members. So there's lots of different ways that, it cuts both ways. It's individuals' money that they're drawing out the company, but then, protecting, your employees with certain benefits that are insured.
And you mentioned at the start of that about there's an understanding that you don't go to a lawyer for bad advice, but I'm sure that happens. Is there how do we govern between good and bad? What would we look out for if we're choosing a legal partner to go, well, that's a good one, that's a bad one, or are they all equal?
That's an interesting question. I think, by far the majority lawyers give good advice.
Yeah.
I don't, we all set out to give good advice. And I think, that's a given when you're looking at law firms. So I think it's about reputation. It's about client recommendation. It's about recommendation from referrers. And by listening to the people who are dealing with the lawyers that you're looking to engage with, that can be, a real source of information about the people that you want to deal with. I mean, people do business with people fundamentally. So, it's helpful to like the people that you're dealing with on all sides, really. Listening to referrers. But I mean, a lot of our work comes through client recommendation, doing a good job, repeat clients, and, referrer recommendation, where we've got, we built up a reputation. People know what you can do.
So it sounds like to me that perhaps there's never intended malpractice in that sense or bad advice.
No.
But actually it comes from, and this is perhaps the two-way street, is that a lack of context can lead to bad advice. So if the business owner or the individual isn't willing to give all of the information, full context, or the lawyer hasn't spent time to get to know them, that's where you can lead to bad advice. So actually it's about being open with each other, is it?
I think that's right. But I mean, bad advice is a long shot. I think, not a long shot, bad advice is unusual.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the wrong way to describe it. I think what you get, if you're open with your lawyers and you give them all the information, you'll get tailored, specific and good advice that's going to add value to your business, in the future when you might want to sell it.
Yeah.
So I think it's about getting the advice right for your business. And it's not the same for every business. If you're selling services or if you're selling goods, your limitations on liability will be approached in a different way. So it's about getting the right advice. Your risk profile might be different because of what you're doing. And it's about then making sure your contracts deal with those risks.
Yep.
So I think it's about getting tailored advice that works for you and your business.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And at the beginning, you described the footprint of Tees, which is throughout the southeast and east of England. Feels like it's quite sizable. Can you talk a little bit about Chelmsford or slightly wider in Essex as to what role that plays? Does it fit perfectly hand in glove with the agricultural past, or is it a different type of customer here? Or tell me about Chelmsford.
I mean, in terms of Chelmsford, I think, Essex and Chelmsford is an entrepreneurial place.
Mm-hmm.
Essex has always had great businesses in it, lots of family-owned business, lots of business that have been passed down the generations, and lots of great businesses. So if you look at the Grant Thornton Top 100 list that they publish every year, which is on turnover, I mean, there are some amazing businesses in there. And a lot of them are family businesses, and a lot of them are people that have, got a great management team together and built a business up over many years. And it's great to see the trajectory that they're on. There still is an agricultural practice in Essex, but I think it's far more business oriented. And what we're looking to do in Chelmsford is, help businesses in Chelmsford, whatever their size, really. I mean, there's 9,000, I think in a survey I read recently, there's 9,000 micro businesses in Essex. Some of those micro businesses are going to be the businesses of the next generation, in 20 years' time, and hopefully selling their business for multi-million-pound price tags. So I think Chelmsford is a really exciting place to do business. There's a great professional advisor community out there to support businesses. There's lots of business organisations which can help businesses. So you can actually get a lot of advice and support without, engaging with people, just speaking to business owners. There's a lot of events that people can attend and speak to people who are in similar businesses or a bit further ahead of them. So I think that's what makes Chelmsford such an interesting place.
Yeah.
And, there's a great business community, and Essex, it's entrepreneurial, it's innovative, resilient, I would say. A lot of businesses out there have a lot of resilience, and they're agile, and I think they try and meet the demands that are thrown at them in a really positive way.
Yeah. Do you have a view on, because obviously you get to meet a lot of these people and their businesses, and I'm interested in the family ones as well. I think that's a really interesting narrative for the county and for Chelmsford. But do you know why Chelmsford Essex has this mindset, or this resilience? Like, where do we think that really comes from? Why is it here?
I mean, I think there's a lot of let me think about this.
Probably needs thought. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
it's not an answerable question. I don't know. It's just something that feels to me like everyone says it, everyone senses it, but I never really know why. Is there an evolution to it? Maybe is it the grind of us kind of coming out of London?
Yeah,
and those kind of things.
Yeah,
really.
I think there's a bit of that. Obviously, people may have started their careers in London. Essex is on the periphery of London, and I think. Maybe historically people have set up businesses in Essex because it's cheaper than setting them up in London, but you've still got all the benefits, the infrastructure, London's easy to reach. And there might be a story in the way that Essex has developed, because it's that positive thinking, isn't it? Where we're human beings, and if you talk the story, over the years, it's been proven. So I don't think it is a story, but it's that reinforcement. People believe this is a really good place to do business, and it becomes it because people want to engage with people who feel a similar way about the area in which they're operating.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is a current mindset. So this is very much alive and still a place to do great business.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you mentioned those micro businesses, of which I know exactly which report you're referring to, and the whole program that we're running here today is pretty much predicated on those 9,000 micro businesses. What's the reality really of running a micro business, perhaps from a legal perspective?
I mean, I think the legal perspective can often get parked when you're running a micro business, and that's completely understandable because, when you first set up a business, your key things are going to be building some revenue, engaging some clients and getting some cash flow, because that gives you some options. From a legal perspective, there are things that you should be thinking about and should be doing. And the reason I say that is not only just to comply with, what you're meant to comply with, but actually when you come, if you fast forward 20 years, what you're doing by getting everything in place now is building value in your business. And so that, the key things you should be thinking about, I mean, on a commercial perspective, insurance. I mean, get yourself insured for what you're doing. And from a legal perspective, how you're structured is really important. If you're going into business with a friend or a couple of friends, you have, difficult as it may be, the best conversations to have are what happens if things don't go as planned. What happens if one of you dies, one of you leaves, one of you isn't contributing to the business in the same way. It's about dealing with those difficult conversations to work out what's going to happen, because if you've set out the parameters in a legal document at the beginning, then if they hope they don't arise, but unfortunately they do, we do see it, you can actually think, okay, well, we've got a process here, and people can part company, maintaining their personal relationship but having dealt with it professionally. And then if you think about trading, your conditions of trading are really, really important. I mean, depending on what business you're in, limiting your liability, payment terms, it's amazing. People will just sign somebody's terms and conditions. What are your payment terms? Do you want to charge interest if people don't pay you? Do you want to suspend services if people don't pay you? All those things can be relatively easy to achieve. And identifying what's critical in your business. I mean, if you're reliant on a supplier who makes a bit of kit that goes into the product that you're supplying to your customer. If you haven't got that supplier secured, even really early on in your business, if it's critical, you're at risk, because if you can't, that affects your whole supply chain and what you're delivering. So it's identifying what is key, and I think prioritising it as a micro business. So deal with what, make your list, whether it's supply contracts, employment contracts, does your website comply with the law? doing your constitutional documents, which is your relationship between your directors and shareholders, and then prioritising them as to what is key to get you off the ground and move you forward in the quickest way.
And with the I guess the makeup of the Essex business, perhaps you've described them as being family businesses and passing them down, and you mentioned inheritance tax. I think I caught that as an acronym earlier and stuff. Do we think it's actually a little bit more rife, these mistakes in Essex and Chelmsford, because of the spirit? And it's like, oh, it won't go wrong, it's fine, I'm just going to go out and sell stuff. Is there an attitude towards legal services that actually we need to debunk and challenge a little bit?
So if you're a seller of a business and you have everything in place that you should have, you're driving the negotiations for the sale of your business. You're driving, the leverage. You have leverage because somebody will do due diligence on your business and not find anything that they can say, oh, well, we made this offer on your financials, but actually all these things aren't in place, so we want to renegotiate the price, or we want to hold back some of your proceeds. So by getting all the things in place that you need to, you are actually securing a greater value for your business in the future.
Yeah. So some of those things that might crop up then, that someone might pick at, and we'll just go, yeah, you're an entrepreneur, you started your business, you are 20 years down the line, and you've had a multi-million-pound offer, strong financials and stuff. What are some of the things that people might come in? Because you mentioned things like contracts. So if you haven't got long contracts with existing customers, is that something that someone can't necessarily devalue, but they might mitigate against? So is there 3 or 4 of those things that stand out? Yeah,
I mean, there's a few things that we come across, obviously, when we're selling, and some things that get, probably the most common things that get picked up by buyers are, you're providing some kind of service, but you haven't got a limit on your liability. So that's a commercial risk. So if you don't align your limit of your liability with insurance, there's a gap there. Mm-hmm. Another area is if you've sort of given shares away in the course of to incentivise people. You may have given shares to employees. You may have bought shares back via the company. There's a process where the company can buy back its own shares from employees. Quite often that's not done correctly, but what it means is that is void. That transaction is void, and the shares still exist with the person you thought you'd bought those shares back from. Now, that's really critical if you've got a buyer buying shares in the future, because that's fundamental. That's what they're buying, are the shares. And if you can't demonstrate title to the shares, then there is a real problem with your deal. In terms of other things, it can be, contracts. So it can be the one that I described as earlier, the supply contract. You've got a really critical supply contract and you've got it for 6 months.
Yeah.
The buyer's going to be saying, go back and renegotiate that contract for 3 years because that's what I need, because I'm paying for the future business, but it might not be there because you haven't got this contract. And the difficulty with that is that obviously at that point, you're in negotiation to sell your business, you're delivering information to a buyer, but your leverage with those third parties to go and get all these things done correctly is impaired, because if you'd have done it correctly at the time and taken advice and spent a bit of money on getting it right in the first place, you do it on your terms. So your arrangements with your supplier are on your terms. It's a commercial, it's in the ordinary course of business. Mm-hmm. We want a bit of longer period of time with you because we need this contract. Whereas if you're doing that because you're under pressure from a buyer, you lose your negotiating position with the person that you're trying to do that arrangement with. So it just puts you on the back foot, I guess, and you don't need to be on the back foot.
Yeah, and I guess that is the challenge. Certainly my perception is that legal services are for when things go wrong, so you perhaps engage at the wrong time after the fact. Is that something you come up against quite a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is I guess when things go wrong, you will speak to your lawyer. But when things have gone wrong, it tends to be more expensive than if you got them right in the first place. Okay. And I think, legal services can actually support. They're a bit of they're a part of your toolkit in running a business, because if you've sold something and there's a dispute over it, but you've got no terms, trying to work out what those terms are, implying those terms, getting evidence together for you to get where you need to be is really difficult. If you've got something in writing that you know what it says and you know what your position is, and you may accept some risks in that contract that you've entered into, but you know what they are, then it's much easier to navigate the position and less costly. In most cases, nobody wants to litigate. It's hugely expensive and often surpass it. The costs of doing that surpass the actual issue in hand. But if you've dealt with that at the beginning, then it tends to be much more straightforward. So the disputes can be handled in a much more manageable way.
So I guess top tip is that prevention versus cure challenge. But is the issue and the bigger challenge for you guys is that you've got two guys setting up business in Chelmsford, great ambition, well connected, perhaps they've come out of the city and they've got lots of people they can already do business with. At what point are they even thinking about, I should really engage a lawyer to get all this right? Is that the biggest thing, that actually there's just a huge knowledge gap? Because as you talk about these things, I'm even sitting here going, oh God, actually, there's things here, like we're 12, 13 years into a business and I'm going, I'm not sure we're as rock solid in those kind of things as we probably should be.
Yeah. I think you should think about it straight away. I mean, obviously, the first thing most people do is run their business through a corporate vehicle. So they purchase a company off Companies House, for instance. The model articles are model.
Yeah.
So, really you need to be thinking straight away that things have legal consequences straight away when you're running a business. Now, whether you can prioritise everything immediately is a different question for for a startup business. There has to be priorities, like in life. You make priorities, but I think it's being alive to the fact that you buy a company, you have directors' responsibilities, you have duties to all sorts of people about how you engage and how you conduct yourself to the outside world, and you protect your shareholders effectively, which could be you, but there could be others. And I think it's about understanding that as soon as you go into business, you're delivering something that has consequences. And I think if you think of it like that, then it's just understanding what those consequences are and protecting yourselves against those consequences.
Yeah. So obviously, as a country, we want to make it easy to do business. We want to make it easy for entrepreneurs to set up and things. But should there be a little bit more education? Perhaps when obviously, if I want to drive a car, I have to pass a test. We can't make everyone pass a test to run a business, I guess. But that knowledge gap and those things, should someone or something be doing a little bit more to kind of go, actually, if you're going to set this business up, I want you to at least go through these few hoops. Whether you act upon it or not, I don't know, but I certainly don't remember really when I set up the business anyone actually going, here's 5 things you absolutely need to do, Rich. Whether you do them or not, but these are 5 things that you should do. Do we need a little bit more protection from ourselves?
Possibly. Possibly. I think there is information out there. I mean, there are business organisations locally who can help you with that. I mean, if you looked at our website, for instance, you'd find articles on, if you're setting up a business. Legal websites can be, a wealth of information. We all publish newsletters. We do a quarterly one. We put articles on all the time on topical things, and they will include things like, what to think about if you're setting up a business, what to think about if you're selling a business. So there is a lot of help out there, but I think it's knowing where to look for it. Our website will give you all that sort of information of what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me is just the thought that enters my head around the spirit and the entrepreneur, and we'll just take that as, they're in Chelmsford, there's lots of them, is that could we make it a little bit more of a fun thing in terms of people go, I just want to get up and go. But actually, if you go and start sitting and say, well, actually, we should all plan our exit now. If we talk about manifesting, which we are kind of alluding to now, should it actually be seen not as an arduous legal process, but actually just say, look, if you took the time to pay for a couple of hours of a lawyer's time and just explain to them your vision, from vision to exit as a premise, and we can just give you the few bits of advice, whether you take them or not, but at least you've listened and you've educated, but making that a really exciting experience, because I think there's something about manifesting the future that makes a lot of sense. Is that an approach that people should take, could take?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely always having a mind's eye to where you want to be in the future is a really good strategy in life, in business, whatever you're doing, really. And I think in terms of businesses, the more time you give yourself to plan an exit, the more flexibility you have. So, I would say people should be, if you're thinking about an exit and you've got a vision for your exit, 5 years prior to the date that you're thinking you might want that to be happening, you should be planning for it. So if there's anything that slipped through the net in terms of that you haven't done so far, you're addressing it. But what it gives you is flexibility to build value in your business. So for instance, you're going great guns and in 5 years' time you think, yeah, that's going to be the time for us. The things that you can do at that 5 year time are look at things like, if I'm an entrepreneur, have I got a really good management team around me? Because when a buyer looks at my business, I actually want to know that it's going to run whether I'm there or not. I'm great added value and I know they'll want me to stay. But actually, they want to know that this business stands on its own 2 feet with or without me. And that adds value. If you've got a property in your business and you want to think, okay, I'd quite like to keep that property out of my business now because I want it personally for my retirement. You've got time to move it in a tax efficient way. If I've got this management team, or if I haven't, how am I going to get them? What am I going to do to incentivise them? So you could get a great management team around you, give them some employee options. There's a scheme called an EMI option scheme, which is tax efficient, and it also enables you to incentivise, all these key people that you want around you to exit. They've got some skin in the game because they can have some shares immediately prior to exit and actually join in that exit process with you and be rewarded for it. So, I mean, that's just 3 things. There's a number of them, but it just enables you to think about all those things add value. All those things are going to get me where I want to be. And, obviously in that 5 years, you then want to be showing how they've added value to your business. You need to sell at the right time. Obviously, your EBITDA, your turnover needs to be going in the right direction over that period. But there's things that you can do that help you achieve that if you look at it early enough.
And as you talk, Lucy, there's a thought running around in my head that obviously legal advice is one thing, but how much of the conversations that you have with your clients and stuff perhaps is a bit of business coaching, a bit inspirational, a bit motivational to get people going. Oh, look over here, this is where you might build value, because obviously you see a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
So do you find yourself crossing that line? Do you always hold back from crossing that line? How does this work?
I mean, I love it. I mean, I love talking to businesses, and I love that commercial aspect to a business. That's why I do what I do, and I don't do other things that are just, purely transactional. But I guess for me, I mean, I was involved in, a business because, I was a partner at Wortley Buyers and we merged with Tees, and obviously I was involved in that business and I managed that business for 5 years before we merged. So I have a real passion for dealing with the commercial as well as the legal. And I think they do go hand in hand. I mean, they completely go hand in hand. You're running your business from a commercial perspective and you're doing the right things commercially. The legal is the support framework, I think, around that, because, you need it. You should have it at all times. Obviously, as a lawyer, I'm going to say that, but that is, you should have it. But commerciality drives your business. The legal should support that, protect you from your risks, protect your value. But the commercial bit is the exciting bit.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting and a great mindset. Without being too negative, what really, other than perhaps, you're exiting in 20 years' time for multi-millions and they're holding a little bit of cash back or whatever, but what really is the cost of getting some of this stuff wrong? Where can it go if you don't protect yourself with these things? Do we see businesses going bust? Do we see people behind bars for some of these things? How far can it go the wrong way?
It can go. Obviously, it can be catastrophically bad. That's unusual. I mean, that would be things like, you're trading fraudulently or wrongful trading. If you're not financially sound and you get into some of those very difficult situations where you should perhaps be thinking, we shouldn't be running this business.
What is the cost of getting these things wrong?
I think the cost of getting these things wrong is you don't actually get the value that you could have got for your business. You can't generate the value. You might get to a sale process and a buyer identifies something. I mean, by way of example, we had something where there was an issue with the limitation of liability, and the buyer either wanted the business restructured before the sale. Now, that's a big risk for a seller, because you don't want to be restructuring your business. You don't want to be changing things because you haven't actually sold it yet. Or alternatively, expecting the reason we have corporate structures is to protect people's individual finances. I mean, that's it. You have limitation of liability as an individual. But if you haven't got these things right and you get into a sale process, you as a seller individually will have to give assurances to a buyer. Now, that's you personally. So you're stepping up from something where you could have protected yourself within a corporate vehicle to you personally putting your proceeds at risks, by way, the buyer might withhold some proceeds or expect to come and claim against you if there is an issue in the company after you've sold it. So it can have a real impact. That's unusual, but that's the benefit of getting things right.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that flows through from that is where you talked about a lot of family businesses, and that top 100 Grant Thornton list is a lot of family businesses, and we see that generally is, even if you aren't building inherent value to sell, you're building the value to pass down to perhaps your children and so on. So making sure, I don't think any of us on here or listening would want to give our children something that isn't safe or sound or legal in that sense. So I guess there's an added responsibility in that aspect as well. Yeah.
And I think well-run businesses just tend to perform better.
Interesting.
If you've got processes and you understand what you're doing and you understand what your risks are in business, you can get on and run your business because you're not worried about those things. It's the uncertainty. So I think if you've got certainty in how you're operating, and you know that you're doing the right thing, and you know that you've covered your risks in an appropriate way for your business, then actually what you focus on is probably what you do best, and that is to actually take your business forward. And that grows value for your family or for you, whatever your future plans are.
And right at the top of the conversation, you talked about some of these, perhaps these startup businesses, friends starting together, couples, whatever, starting together, and eventually they grow into big things. So is it right to say that Tees supports businesses at every single level, those 9,000 micro businesses, the entrepreneurs starting up as well as the big ones? Because I guess some of the listeners might be a little bit like, well, they're massive, hundreds of employees, that's not for me. But do you operate across the whole spectrum here?
We operate across the whole spectrum. I mean, obviously, at the beginning, people are looking at setting up their business, and that's the critical thing. What happens, how we're going to govern our relationship between us. A little bit further along, they're looking at protecting their business, looking at getting all their things in place, like contracts of employment, protecting their intellectual property, registering a trademark, relatively inexpensive, has a lot of value in the future because it protects your name in the area in which you're operating. And then sort of in the medium term, if you want to get investment, if you want to borrow money, maybe take in some investment for a small shareholding. If you want to buy other businesses because you're growing at that stage, then obviously, that's something we can help with. And then to the back end, selling your business. So the whole, and I do feel it a privilege. I've had the privilege of having, a number of clients that I've gone on that journey with over the last 20 years. And it's absolutely fantastic. You obviously get to know the owners of the business really, really well. You go through their life challenges with them as well, because, they're individuals as well as business partners, essentially. And there's nothing more rewarding than actually being on that journey with them and understanding, how they've grown along the way and how they've sold. And, with our wealth arm, then, getting some advice about, how you invest those proceeds, how you what options are available to you that are tax efficient, that help you manage that process. Because obviously, while you hold shares, although inheritance tax rules have changed slightly, it's still quite beneficial to pass those shares on from an inheritance tax perspective. But once you've got cash, it's all available. So, so people need advice on what to do with that cash. And
obviously, I think some of the advice that you mentioned earlier is like the first port of call might just be jumping on the Tees website, subscribing to newsletters and stuff. Could I just ask one small question? Is don't jump on AI tools and ask the legal question. Because obviously I bet you're getting that a lot at the moment. I would imagine.
Yeah, we do get that a lot, and I think there's a word of caution on that, and that is that the advice isn't often right.
Yeah, No, I get that. And Lucy, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, talk to you about something, a challenge, hopefully more prevention than cure here, how would they get hold of you?
Well, I'm available at Tees. My name's Lucy Folley, and my contact details are on the Tees website. And I'll be delighted. Do I need more detail than that?
No, you're absolutely fine. I think the great thing about this is people can Google that, get on Tees Law website and have a look, or I guess comment on the video, comment whatever you need to do. But I think that's hugely insightful. I think there's so many avenues to explore here that I think listening to you, my advice is probably just to open our minds a little bit more, and I just to debunk a little bit in that sense is my default position for a lot of this would probably just talk to my accountant, but it sounds like my accountant can do a lot of the I's and the T's, but they can't do the legal framework and the advice, and actually any advice they're given isn't legal advice in that sense. It's something to reconsider for people like me as well in that sense.
And I think also pick up the phone. We speak to clients who have new inquiries, who just want to chat a bit about what we do. We can chat to people, contrary to popular belief. We don't charge for that.
On the clock, off the clock. No, it's not. Yeah,
it's a chat. We want to work with businesses who've got vision. We are a business with our own vision, and we want to work with businesses who are interested in doing things. Making a successful business, having a successful business journey, and we'd like to be on that journey with people, but that involves chatting to people, to getting to know them. We are quite happy to do that, or everybody in my team is quite happy to just have a chat.
Great offer. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
Thank you.